Welcome to the deep dive. I'm really glad you are here with us today. Our mission for this session is incredibly focused, and honestly, it just feels universally relevant right now.
It really does.
Yeah. We are unpacking a very short but profoundly impactful piece of text today. It is called The Architecture of Silent Becoming.
It is such a remarkably concise piece of writing,
Yeah.
but it tackles this massive, almost universal psychological hurdle.
Oh, for sure. And I want to just take a second to speak directly to you, the listener, because if you are tuning into this, you likely identify as a lifelong learner.
No.
You read the books, you listen to the deep dives, you try to optimize your routines and put a lot of deliberate effort into your personal or your professional development.
You do the work.
Exactly, you do the work. But if we are being totally honest, you also know the deep, really grinding frustration of putting in all that invisible effort day after day and feeling like you are getting absolutely nowhere.
It is that very familiar, deeply exhausting plateau.
Yeah. You look at your career trajectory. Or maybe it is a new skill you were trying to master. Or even just your own internal emotional regulation,
Yeah.
and you just think to yourself, nothing is changing. I am completely stuck.
Right. And this piece of text, it directly confronts that exact feeling. The core premise we are exploring today is that tension.
That friction between feeling stuck and what is actually happening.
Exactly. The tension between the illusion that you are stagnating
Yeah.
and the actual biological structural reality that growth doesn't always make noise.
Growth doesn't always make noise. That is such a grounding thought.
What's fascinating here is how immediately the author challenges the cultural water we all swim in. I mean, we live in an environment that is utterly obsessed with loud, highly visible milestones.
Oh, absolutely. We want the shiny before and after photos.
We want the promotion announcements on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
We want the metrics. We are so conditioned to expect tangible, undeniable proof that we are moving forward. But this piece strips all of that away. It focuses entirely on this quiet concept of silent becoming. And it asks us to completely reconsider our fundamental relationship with progress.
Because if we only validate our growth when it is obvious to everyone else, we are in trouble.
We are missing the most critical phases of our own development. The piece pulls us out of our modern obsession with immediate results, and it roots us back in how real structural change actually occurs.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the way the author grounds this idea in natural metaphors, that is where the piece completely grabbed me.
It is very beautifully done.
It starts by listing these undeniable truths of the natural world. The first one is simply roots grow in the dark.
It is such a simple observation, but it holds a tremendous amount of weight when you really sit with it.
It does. And right after that, the author writes, muscles rebuild in rest. Now, you already know how muscle hypertrophy works. You don't build the muscle while you are at the gym, straining under the barbell.
Right. The active effort, the actual lifting of the heavy weight, is technically the destruction phase. You are actively tearing the muscle fibers down.
Exactly. The building of the muscle, the creation of the actual new strength, that only happens when you put the weights down, go home, and go to sleep.
It happens in total stillness.
Total stillness. And we accept that. We accept that as a physiological baseline. We don't even question it.
But for some reason, we completely reject that exact same law when it comes to our personal growth.
We really do. We assume if we aren't actively sweating, metaphorically speaking, we aren't making progress.
We forget that the pause, the space, the rest, is structurally and functionally essential for the rebuild.
Yeah.
We assume the exertion is the only variable that matters.
Yeah.
But if you never stopped lifting, you wouldn't get stronger. You would just eventually break down.
You'd completely destroy this system.
Precisely. And if we take that baseline biological reality and look at the next line of the piece, the pattern expands. The author notes, healing happens quietly.
I love that line so much. Healing happens quietly.
Think about a cut on your hand, hidden under a bandage. You don't feel the cells dividing. You don't hear a sound as the skin knits itself back together. It is an entirely silent, totally invisible process.
And crucially, you don't intervene. You don't pull the bandage off every 5 minutes to check if it's healing yet.
Because if you do, you actually interrupt the process.
You tear it back open.
Right. You break the fragile new tissue that is forming. You demand a status update from a process that requires uninterrupted darkness.
That is such a perfect analogy for how we treat our own emotional or professional recovery. We keep ripping the bandage off to see if we are better yet.
We do. By stacking these specific examples, the roots in the dark, the muscles in rest, the skin healing quietly, the author is establishing a universal law of change. True foundational shifts require a period of invisible gestation.
But we don't treat it as gestation. That is the tragedy of it. We misdiagnose our own gestation periods as stagnation.
That is the core issue right there.
We think because we can't see the leaves sprouting above the soil, the tree must be dead.
We completely ignore the fact that the roots might be doing the absolute hardest work of all, pushing through dense soil in total darkness.
Misdiagnosing gestation as stagnation, that really is the trap. And I think that leads directly into what I found to be the most piercing part of this entire piece.
The shift in tone.
Yeah. The author shifts from these natural, earthy metaphors back to our daily human experience and explicitly calls out the complete absence of external validation during this phase.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is a harsh pivot, but a really necessary one.
The piece says, in this phase of silent becoming, there is no applause, no announcement, no visible proof.
No visible proof.
And I read that, and honestly, I just had to laugh because it exposes how much we are all secretly waiting for a cookie.
We really are. We want the dashboard to light up green. We want the notification.
Yes, we live in a deeply feedback-rich environment. Your watch buzzes when you hit your step goal. You get immediate data on a social media post.
We are conditioned from the time we get gold stars in grade school to expect immediate, visible metrics for our efforts.
And that trains us to believe that if there is no notification and if there is no visible proof, then no action occurred. Nothing happened.
Which is a terrifying thought when you apply it to the deep internal work of becoming a better person or mastering a highly complex discipline.
Right, because the most important work has no dashboard.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this observation about the lack of applause is actually a warning. It is highlighting how dangerous it is to rely solely on visible proof to validate your efforts.
How so? What is the specific danger you see there?
If your motivation for personal development or learning or healing is completely tethered to the expectation of an announcement or applause,
You are going to give up.
you are going to abandon the process prematurely because the feedback loop is just too long.
You are outsourcing your own becoming to an audience that isn't even paying attention to the invisible work.
Precisely. You will stop watering the seed simply because you haven't seen the flower yet, completely ignoring the fact that the roots are finally establishing themselves.
But let me play devil's advocate for just a second here.
Sure.
If there is no visible proof and no one is clapping for us, how do we actually know we are growing? How do we know we aren't just tricking ourselves into thinking we are in this silent becoming phase when really we are just being complacent?
That is the exact anxiety the author anticipates. And it is a completely valid question.
Here's where it gets really interesting there, because the piece doesn't just leave us in the dark with no applause and no way to measure our progress.
No, it doesn't.
It pivots from telling us what is missing, the announcements, the visible proof, to detailing exactly what is actually happening.
It provides us with an entirely new set of metrics.
Right. It gives us the true metrics of internal change. And they are just beautifully subtle. The author lists them out. Just small shifts, new boundaries, different reactions, stronger thoughts.
It shrinks our massive, very dramatic expectations of transformation down to these incredibly intimate, quiet victories.
And I think we really need to look closely at these specific metrics because they do not look like much from the outside. Let's take new boundaries, for example.
From the outside, setting a new boundary often looks like nothing at all. In fact, to the outside world, setting a boundary might just look like inaction.
It is just you quietly declining a meeting. Or choosing not to engage in an argument you usually would jump right into.
Right. There is no confetti when you set a boundary. To an observer, it is a complete non-event. But internally?
Internally, it is huge.
The amount of self-awareness required to recognize a limit and the courage required to enforce it without over-apologizing is incredibly significant.
It takes so much energy to hold that line.
It does. It is a fundamental shift in your baseline.
Yeah.
And the same principle applies to the next metric the author provides. Different reactions.
This one really resonated with me. Think about how deeply ingrained our reactions are.
When someone criticizes you, or when a project suddenly falls apart at work, your nervous system has a default reaction that it has practiced for years, maybe even decades.
You snap back.
Yeah.
Or you immediately get defensive. Or you just shut down entirely.
Right. So changing that reaction, even just taking a single intentional breath before you respond, instead of lashing out immediately, is a massive invisible victory.
To someone sitting across the table from you, it just looks like you paused.
They have absolutely no idea what just happened in your head.
They didn't see the war you just fought.
Exactly. But from a behavioral standpoint, Interrupting a deeply ingrained neural pathway is one of the hardest things an adult can do. It requires immense cognitive override.
Cognitive
You are
overrides.
actively rewriting a behavioral script in real time. That is significant growth, but it completely lacks the dramatic visual flair we usually associate with transformation.
That is such a grounded way to look at it. You aren't just taking a breath, you are literally applying the brakes to an automatic stress response. And I think that perfectly sets up the final metric on this list. Stronger thoughts.
How did you interpret that one?
To me, noticing stronger thoughts in yourself is the ultimate quiet victory for a dedicated learner. When you are constantly consuming information, reading articles, trying to improve your mindset, it can sometimes feel like you are just throwing water into a leaky bucket.
You wonder if any of it is actually sticking.
Exactly. You feel like nothing is changing. But then one day, you face a challenge that would have absolutely crushed you a year ago. A client rejects a proposal, or you make a very public mistake at work.
And a year ago, you would have spiraled.
The internal monologue would have been so harsh, I can't do this, I'm an imposter, I am failing.
The default narrative takes over completely.
But this time, almost without trying, a stronger thought naturally emerges. Your inner monologue steps in, almost like a separate voice, and says, this is a difficult setback, but it is not a permanent state. I am capable of figuring this out.
You catch your own negativity in real time.
Yes. And nobody else hears that stronger thought. Nobody else can see that internal battle you just won in a fraction of a second. But that stronger thought is the undeniable proof that all the quiet work you have been doing is actually taking root.
It really is. And when you synthesize all of these subtle elements, the small shifts, the new boundaries, the different reactions, the stronger thoughts, you begin to really understand the title of the piece itself, the architecture of silent becoming.
The architecture.
Yes, these elements, these quiet shifts, they are the invisible structural framework being built inside of you. Think about how a massive skyscraper is constructed in the middle of a dense city.
It is just a giant, messy pit in the ground for months on end.
Exactly. Before
Yeah.
a single floor goes up into the skyline for everyone to see, construction crews spend months, sometimes well over a year, just digging down into the earth.
Working entirely below street level.
They're pouring massive amounts of concrete. They're driving huge steel pilings deep into the bedrock,
Yeah.
working almost entirely out of sight from the public.
To anyone walking by on the street, looking through the chain link fence, it just looks like noise and dirt. It looks like zero vertical progress is being made.
It looks stagnant. But without that deep, invisible foundation, the building would literally collapse under its own weight the moment it tried to rise.
Wow.
These stronger thoughts, these new boundaries we talked about, they are the steel pilings. You are reinforcing your psychological foundation.
So that when the visible growth finally does happen, when you do start building upward, you actually have the structural integrity to sustain it.
Precisely. You are building the capacity to hold the growth.
So what does this all mean for us? We have talked about the deep frustration of feeling stuck. We have looked at the natural laws of quiet growth, the roots in the dark and the resting muscles.
We have discussed the real danger of needing an audience for your progress.
And we have walked through the actual subtle metrics of internal change. And the author brings all of this full circle to offer something very, very grounding.
It delivers this incredibly direct reassurance to the reader.
It does. It says, you are not stuck. You are becoming. And just because no one can see it doesn't mean it isn't happening.
It is giving the reader explicit permission to trust the unseen process.
It reframes that agonizing feeling of being stalled out. It is not a failure. It is a necessary phase of active, foundational construction.
It is a vital reframe, and I think it is crucial to look at the brilliant simplicity of the very last word of this piece.
The final note.
Right. After delivering that deep reassurance, the text ends with a single word, placed entirely on its own line. Pause.
It is definitely not just a stylistic choice.
No, it is a literal instruction to the reader. In a modern culture that demands constant motion, constant output, and constant proof of progress, being told to simply pause is quietly radical.
It is an invitation to stop seeking the external evidence.
It is. It is asking you to sit in the quiet for a moment and actually honor the invisible work you're doing.
To give yourself some grace.
The pause is where the integration happens. It is the moment of rest where the muscle actually rebuilds.
I really appreciate that framing. The pause is where the integration happens. It is as if the author is saying, okay, I have just handed you this new perspective. Now stop running on the mental treadmill for a second. Stand still and actually feel the ground beneath your feet.
And I think this raises an important question. A final provocative thought that I want to leave you to mull over as you step back into your day.
Let's hear it.
We have established that the periods where you feel the most stagnant might actually be periods of intense invisible construction. So I want you to look at your current life. Look at the exact area where you feel the most frustrated, the most delayed, the most stuck.
The place where you're desperately waiting for that visible proof.
Right. If we apply the logic of this text and assume that this stuck phase is actually an active underground construction site of your own silent becoming, what kind of massive internal architecture are you unknowingly building for your future self right now?
That is heavy.
What kind of towering structure is going to be supported by the deep invisible foundation you are quietly pouring today?
What an absolutely phenomenal question to walk away with. What are you building in the dark? This has been such a deeply reflective and reassuring conversation. To you, our listener, thank you so much for carving out the space to join us today. We know your time is valuable, and we love that you choose to spend it exploring these ideas with us. Keep trusting your own silent becoming. Keep laying that invisible foundation. You've been listening to The Pause, and we'll be back at 8 a.m. tomorrow.